Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be changing it up a little. Instead of just making your usual shitpost goy slop, today we're going to do something big-brained, something intellectual. Today I'm going to be doing research on fictional countries and government and ranking how free and democratic each regime is using the Economist's Democracy Index. We're going to judge how free or unfree each fictional government is, as well as how stable or unstable it is. Now, before we start, keep in mind, I am relatively well versed in the subjects I am researching, at least I think I do, but I might not cover everything. 2, there might not be enough information on that country's government, so my rating may be a bit higher or lower. And 3rd, this whole chart is somewhat subjective, so my rating might be higher, it might be lower than yours. So please take this rating with a grain of salt. Without further ado, how does The Economist rank democracies? The Economist Democracy Index divides itself into 5 categories. The first is electoral processes. Do elections occur within the country? If so, how competitive are they? How often do they occur? Second is functioning of government. Is there checks and balances? Are their branches of power separate? If so, how much power does each of the agencies de facto have? Is the parliament a rubber stamp? Is the government capable of securing itself and its territory, or is it plagued with insurgents, warlords, or cartel? Does the government peacefully transfer power if a new one is elected? 3rd is political participation. How often do voters participate in elections? If so, who is allowed to vote? And what is the total enfranchisement of citizens that are voting? 4th is political culture. How much does the population support the democratic process? How much legitimacy does the ruling government have? Is there a culture of compromise or a hotbed of extremism? Is there a cult of personality among the ruler? Is political violence condemned, condoned, or encouraged? Lastly, we have civil liberties. Do citizens have freedom of speech, religion, peaceable assembly, etc.? Does the rule of law and due process exist? If so, how equally do those laws apply? Alright, now that you've had your appetizer, let's get on to the main course and start ranking the 3 countries in this video. First up,
my name is Christian C, and I am proud to be playing my PS3 with my virginity. There's old trolls and new trolls and good and the bear. Sun issue, rose issue, mine says senior year.
First up we have Quickville by Christian Weston Chandler. First up we have the electoral processes. I scored it 0. As per the lore, no elections have ever been held in Quickville, and the mayor is not an elected position, but rather an inherited dynastical position that is held until the mayor's expiration. As for functioning of government, I give it a score of 2.3, as it maintains a functioning stable government. It runs a post office, a radio and TV station under the call signs KCWC, and it has a shopping mall where citizens purchase goods with a stable currency. The government itself, however, is very authoritarian. Checks and balances are practically non-existent. The mayor is a consolidated position encompassing the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. Quickville has no laws or due process, and rule is done by decree from the mayor. And said decrees are done on a whim based on the mayor's emotional state at that present moment, whether it be bizarre fines or crackdowns and arrests on trolls based on little to no evidence other than the mayor's paranoia. Police forces, accordingly, are not bound by any peace officer standards training, instead being paramilitary units that seemingly enforce brutality among their ranks rather than weed it out. Any supervisory agencies, such as councils created to serve the mayor, are little more for show and are easily and often ignored by the mayor. As for political participation, I give it a score of 0 since, as I said before, no elections are held and therefore no citizen of Quickville, whether human, Pokemon, or Sonichu, is enfranchised to vote in elections. Rule is entirely top-down, with Pokryshkin ruling with an iron fist and cult of personality. Mayor in Quickville is pretty much the equivalent of Der Führer in Nazi Germany, albeit even more unrestrained and lower scoring on this index, as Germany at least managed to hold regular elections during the 1930s to give a veneer of democracy, even if they merely were sham elections. This is technically why countries like North Korea place higher on the index than Burma, as even a facade of a functioning government equates to a higher placement on the index. As for political culture, I give it a score of 0.2. Political culture in Quickville is neither a culture of compromise nor a breeding ground for extremism. Rather, it is a strictly top-down structure based entirely on the mayor's worship, akin to a god. Every major public holiday is a reflection of this, with days such as Praise Christian Day. Violence is commonplace in Quickville, often carried out, orchestrated, and endorsed by the mayor himself. Anybody who isn't the mayor or part of Christian's inner circle is merely a background character who is thrust into situations at the mayor's discretion and without resistance, as likely citizens of Quickville are too afraid to speak out against his tyrannical rule. And lastly, we have civil liberties, which I give a score of 0.1. As media is served in Quickville through the KCWC TV and radio stations. However, all press and media is state-run in Quickville, and free and independent newspapers are not allowed. Press in Quickville is little more than propaganda of the state. Citizens do enjoy a decent freedom of movement throughout Quickville, and there is no mentions in canon lore that there are any curfews nor restrictions in public areas. However, citizens of Quickville are under constant surveillance not only through the paramilitary security forces, but through Magitu's mind-reading ability, giving a Big Brother level of surveillance that not even the East German Ministerium für Staatssicherheit couldn't even dream of. citizens are punished harshly for dissenting opinions, whether through mob violence, Sonichu security forces called in to torture and beat dissidents, which is incredibly common with the mayor's volatility, such as those who do not attend the aforementioned Christian Praise Day. This ranks it lower in civil liberties than any other country in our world. Final score, which is adding up every single category and dividing it by 5, you get a final score of 0.5. CWCville is ranked firmly as an authoritarian regime, even lower than North Korea, only ranked higher than one failed state, Afghanistan, but it's even outranked by Burma. Next up, we have Pokryshkin's Russian Federation. First up, once again, we have electoral processes, which I give a score of 2.1, since elections do occur throughout the country on the federal, state, and local levels, and the elections occur regularly and on schedule. However, the elections are not very competitive, especially at the federal level. Oligarchs are present in the nation's political system and represented through the CWCville, an intertwining of both the corporations, the military-industrial complex, and the state, which often finance and support Pokryshkin and his government in exchange for securing contracts within the state. As for a legislature, since the creation of the Duma, the Russian Federation has taken steps towards democratizing. The Duma, which convenes regularly, is capable of passing legislature, which does have de facto power. Duma elections are similarly non-competitive, with opposition being controlled heavily to give a veneer of democracy, only ranking higher due to the existence of multiple parties themselves, as opposed to a one-party state like its neighbor Germany. Uncontrolled opposition does exist, such as the socialists and the Narodniks, but it's often plagued by infighting to the point where it fails to gain any prominent position in the nation's politics. Then we have functioning of government, which I give a score of 3.5. The Russian Federation is nominally a constitutional federal republic, with distinct branches of government including the legislature, Duma, and an executive presidency. Power is de jure balanced between the state and federal governments, similar to how the United States is in our world and in their world. However, it is significantly paralyzed by the CWCville's interference. Infrastructure is very well built up, with roads and railways capable of serving most of the country, some of which is refurbished from either Soviet-era roads or the Trans-Siberian Railway, also erected during the former Soviet era. Power lines are also being erected throughout the country, and most of its citizens in its urban areas are fully connected onto its power grid. The government also regularly funds and builds schools, hospitals, and prisons. The country also has a trained standing army and distinct police force called the militia, with both being trained to handle their respective situations. A post office is also established and serves most of the country, and the ruble remains relatively stable. Now, political participation, in which I am scoring a 2, because citizens residing in the Federation are capable of voting and electing members of the Duma and the presidency, and voter turnout is reasonable for a country still developing since the collapse of its predecessor, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Voter enfranchisement is also decently widespread, with the voting age being around the age of majority and extending to all men regardless of property ownership. Elections, despite their heavily influenced and somewhat non-competitive nature, do sometimes produce spontaneous results, most often at the local level, with opposition parties often taking seats as mayors and city councilors. Then we have political culture, where I scored a 3.8, and this is where it scores the highest, as a culture of compromise has been prevalent in Pokryshkin's government since the time it was a small warlord state in central Siberia. Unlike its neighbors, which often unified through direct conflict, Novosibirsk made multiple attempts and succeeded in diplomatically unifying through other warlords. However, no roses without its thorn, as Novosibirsk often used economic pressure, political meddling such as installing pro-unification politicians in high-level positions, and even drills along the border with threats of invasion in order to pressure the rival warlords. Still, the country managed to bloodlessly annex its neighbors, which leads to that higher score. It also is capable of holding talks with neighbors if they are somewhat compatible in ideology, such as with the rival Russian Republic led by Boris Yeltsin, which saw the two integrate armies, economies, and eventually demilitarize their borders until Pokryshkin got the diplomatic upper hands and integrated the Russian Republic diplomatically. Pokryshkin is also capable of compromising and even collaborating with his vice president, Vasily Shukshin. Where it also falls short is its persecution of what it considers extremist ideologies, with militiamen deployed to gun down the Narodniks, with orders simply being titled, "Kill patrolmen, kill, kill, kill," hence causing me to downgrade its. Then lastly we have civil liberties, which I give a 3. Since civil liberties are somewhat present, however, they are very few and far between. Independent newspapers and trade unions exist, but pale in comparison to state-sanctioned ones. Freedom of press is rare in the Federation, as newspapers are often censored in the name of unity, Outside of political cases, law and order does exist, and citizens are subjected to proper due process in a court of law for civil cases. The militia is accordingly trained in a standardized peace officer environment, and the law does enforce the citizens' right to private property. And the state has not seized any property outside of wartime without due process. It still falls short of a free regime, as the political system is still dominated by the pragmatism of the country's president, Pokryshkin, which leads to its placement here in the middle. And once again, we go and add up all of the categories together and divide it by 5 to give it a final score of 2.9, which ranks Pokryshkin's Russia as a high authoritarian regime teetering on a low hybrid regime. Basic democratic institutions de jure exist but are largely overshadowed by the military-industrial complex and the oligarchy. In our world, it would rank below Oman and above Togoland, and of course much higher than CWCville, which would cause it to win first place in this video. And here are the final results for both countries covered in this video. Well, that wraps it up, and I hope you had as much fun watching this as I did making this. Please let me know what next 2 countries you want me to cover in the next video. Please like and subscribe as it helps me grow. Anyway, let me go and give a firm salute to our first responders, our police and firefighters, and our brave men and women serving our country. And I also celebrate America 250. Until next time, stay safe out there.